Yeah, so my son's at home at the moment. He's 9, so I'm sort of forcing him to do some reading. So he's doing Horrible Histories, and it's about World War II. But within 3 pages, it's talking about there were heroes and monsters. And I sort of read that and thought, why are we telling our 9-year-old children there are heroes and monsters? Because like life's just not that black and white. And, so you're sort of mentioning about this sort of gender divide, but actually we've probably been taught this from a really young age, that it's us and them, and you're either a goodie or a baddie. And at some point, I think we've just got to grow up a bit and realize that, most people are just doing the best they can, and they're probably not out to get you because they're probably busy just trying to deal with their own stuff, right?
So true.
So yeah, I think it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, and again, it's my kind of Cinderella complex, that poor old Cinderella's in the basement at the clutches of a malevolent force. She can't do anything about it. With it's even the stepmother she can't overcome, let alone anybody else, and she needs good old Prince Charming to come along to save her. And it shows, women. It just sort of reinforces the idea that women are actually a bit weak, and men are the heroes. But then we all know that when the excitement of falling in love kind of passes on, and the neurochemicals start to balance down, and we stop being stupid, because at the end of the day, falling in love makes you stupid. It has to, so that we procreate and stay around to make sure the babies grow and survive and all the rest of it. When it makes us normal again, all the little things we thought were very cute in the romantic period become massive irritants, don't they? And then we become the monsters. But I think the whole thing about it is that we are monsters inside of us. We're capable of. Viktor Frankl is one of my big mentors. The Man's Search for Meaning. I think I mentioned it, and he said, we have to remember that man is capable of building the gas chambers, but man is also capable of walking into the chambers with their heads held high, because they can't change the circumstances. But if you can change the circumstances, then you're challenged. He says, if you can't change your circumstances, you're challenged to change yourself, which is an obvious thing to say, isn't it, really? But I think the fact that we get hijacked by our emotions, our uncertainty, our insecurities, our fears, are we going to survive this situation? It can make us a monster, and that's just being in emergency mode. But we shouldn't be ashamed of that.
Yeah.
Talk about it, reflect on it, become more emotionally understanding of ourselves.
I think that's so key. And I think, there's lots of sort of narratives out there that maybe lead us astray, the kind of the heroes and the monsters. And I think just reflecting on what you were saying, a lot of women will say, oh, well, if I speak up assertively, I'll be, labeled as a bitch. Whereas, a man would be seen as being powerful. And on some level, I probably did kind of fall victim to that a little bit, because I did recognize the monster in me, and I can be horrible, right? And I probably did to some degree think women are not supposed to be like that. It's really not sexy, right? And, again, it's like you say, it's not to say that it's okay to go out and behave badly or hurt people. But I think you've got to sort of give yourself permission to have a monster in you. And it's only by doing that you stop fighting with it. Because what took me a very long time to work out is the more you fight it, actually, the more energy you give it. And I just ended up being more prickly and more kind of monstrous. Whereas, so the route to actually being a better version is not to let yourself off the hook, but to kind of forgive yourself and to acknowledge that we've all got our demons, right? But you can change how you, your relationship with that monster and almost befriend it, because your monster is trying to protect you. It doesn't always go about it in a particularly charming way, but it is trying to protect you. So it's a really sort of counterintuitive route to kind of not taming the monster, but learning to live with it.
Yeah, I think so. And that's absolutely bang on. Absolutely bang on. So today I'm here with the lovely Sarah Furness. Now, Sarah is an ex-combat helicopter pilot and now is very big in the public speaking realm, talking about positive mindset and how we deal with our uncertainties, how we move them forward, how we help ourselves to overcome all the doubts and the uncertainties, as I say. And she's really an amazing person to listen to and And it's such a pleasure to have you here, Sarah. So give us a little bit of an intro about what you're doing now, how you got into the military, and what your plans are for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's an absolute pleasure to be here and to be talking to you today. So thank you for inviting me. So why am I here? That's a big question, but the shorter answer is I joined the Air Force 20 odd years ago, did 21 years as a helicopter pilot in the RAF, and it was brilliant. I loved it. But towards the end of my career, I discovered mindfulness really because of lots of things that we've already been talking about previously, about sort of learning how to deal with your emotions and learning how to accept yourself even when you don't really like who you are, and realizing that self-loathing doesn't really work if you want to try and be a better person. So I sort of discovered mindfulness was a way for me to just navigate my emotions a little bit more skillfully and take back a little bit more agency in my life. And then I sort of realized, it's sort of like a light gets turned on, realized there were lots of other really amazing people out there who probably were going through similar sort of internal battles. And, I wanted to sort of share the secret, I suppose. And so I left the Air Force and set up my company, Well-Be-It, in order to teach mindfulness. That was my plan. And I was going to cure the world of all suffering, or mostly was going to cure the world of self-loathing. That was my big plan. But I sort of realized quite quickly that mindfulness is quite hard to sell. There's a lot of doubters out there. I was one of them. And so it's quite hard to sell, but everyone will be like, yeah, but tell me about flying helicopters in Iraq, Sarah. That's interesting. So I kind of realized, in business, you've got to work out what your most sellable trait is. And I realized that the stories were what people associated with me and what people were excited to hear about. But actually, as you've already talked about, uncovering the aviation mindset, there's a lot of stuff you can learn about life from the cockpit. So now I tell stories, and they are lessons learned on the battlefield, in inverted commas, but I can translate them into everyday life and go, what does that mean for you? Well, focus on what really matters in the moment. That's just what we do when we say fly the aircraft, isn't it? So that was the evolution of how I sort of find myself speaking to you today.
It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And I think this is the thing, isn't it? We can either promote ourselves on an external image and try and continue to go down that line without actually throwing out the substance of the message that we're trying to deliver. And I think your message is very clear. And I think it's a very humble message, is that you don't want to show off about being a combat helicopter pilot, which is the classic blokes thing. We watch Top Gun and you just think, oh, I'd love to be all that, be that hero. But understanding actually that it's a good lead into talking about something much, much more important. And at the end of the day, you've told me, and I've listened to your stuff about being shot at a number of times, and that's a great metaphor for life. Is that how do we deal with being shot at, whether somebody's telling us we're complete wankers, or whether the children are looking at us as though we're evil parents and they didn't ask to be born, and they want to go and live somewhere else with different parents and things like that. How do we deal with it? Because it's the same in every stage of life. We're hit by these limbic messages, or emotional messages, and what we do. But the whole point is we grab people's attention with the storytelling, which is very big, I think, in your realm. I mean, you one of the we're going to get onto this the whole thing about minorities and gender stereotyping, but the idea that you were a female in a male world, and how you had to deal with that, how to deal with the masculinity and the femininity on both sides of the spectrum, really. I mean, I've seen one of your videos and you talk about the idea that you tried to be male, you tried to match male with male, and I thought that's really interesting, and that caused you a lot of anxiety, I think.
Yeah, it did. I think, some people, some of my, male friends who have served with do say, well, Sarah, you are just a bloke, basically. So I probably have got a lot of masculine traits anyway, and that, dare I say, it might be why I was attracted to this. You say you watch Top Gun. Well, so did I, and when I was 12, I used to sort of see myself as a bit of an action hero. I had this penknife, right? And I just thought it made me invincible. So whether or not we think that's feminine or masculine, I've always had that kind of gung-ho thing about me. So, that's probably part of it. But equally, I did definitely try to ramp that up. I tried to dial that up. And of course, underneath that all, I'm also still quite emotional. And again, is that feminine, is it masculine? I don't know. I know it's a Sarah trait that I can be pretty emotional and quite sulky and quite moody, especially when you're 21 going through flying training, all that pressure on you, all those hormones, it's an absolute melting pot for you to just get it spectacularly wrong, right? So I think it was that slight conflict of trying to ham up this masculine side, but not allowing the feminine side to come out. And also an element of, I wanted to look like an attractive woman, but then you think, well, does everybody think I'm trying to sleep with them, So there's lots of confusing things going on at that time. But ultimately, you learn over time that you're not fooling anyone, right? Everyone has got your number from the get-go. And actually years before I learned to accept myself for who I was, they'd already kind of figured out and go, yeah, well, that's Sarah, but yeah, she, and they kind of banter you and you think that's you being rejected, but actually that's them including you. So, it took me a long time to figure out not to bother trying to be someone I'm not, because it's a waste of time and it's kind of exhausting.
Yeah, it's good. But why this is the question, you're 21 years old. Why did you find yourself in that situation? The same for me. I'm a male, I'm a heterosexual male. So I wanted to have female attention. Clearly, when you're a teenager, you suddenly you sprout things all over you. The neurochemicals and the hormones are pumping around your body. And it's the basic form when we were cavemen is designed, well, you've got to have sex. And you got to do it quite a few times in order to ensure that your seed is spread, and then you've got to kind of hang around, and you've got to show a bit of commitment. So it needs to, you need lots of oxytocin and bonding and all that sort of stuff. And then I think then there's that whole thing about rejection, and the rejection was very terminal in the old days, wasn't it? If somebody didn't like you, you'd be left out of the cave and you die, or be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, as I often talk about. But why is it that we have to promote our sexuality so much? And I suppose in that very high intense environment that you were, you don't have the luxury of that, because you're having to make these split second decisions, and the kind of external attractions and the external motivations are you just don't have the luxury of doing that in a way. And actually, that's where we find our inner self, isn't it? The depth of our being able to survive, but without being a monster. We talked about it before, didn't we? Not being afraid of being the monster and the fieriness and the unattractive emotional side coming out. Yeah, it's accepting that we're going to feel uncertain and a bit monstery, but that's all part of our survival. And then, so it's an interesting idea, isn't it?
Yeah, 100% true. And I think so. And I think, dare I say it, certainly in my 20s, we did equate self-worth with, not just on the bedpost potentially, or how much interest. And again, maybe men and women have a slightly different view on this, but certainly, there was a temptation to think if you sleep with someone, then they love you, right? And then that means you're worth something. And you quickly realize that's not necessarily, not quickly even, you realize that's not necessarily how it works. But I think we're just so primarily driven by a need to feel loved and accepted. And, even now, even though I've done all this work on myself, if I go out with my partner and I'm tired and I want to go home and he won't come home with me, I can feel like a real panic rising in me going, oh my God, he doesn't love me anymore. And I think that's bonkers, Sarah. You've been together 9 years. He's going to be home in half an hour, but I can still feel that really strong kind of, obviously he doesn't love me, I'm a monster kind of thing. So, it is, I guess it's not going anywhere, and you just learn to, tolerate it almost, because one of the techniques I learned in mindfulness, which really helped me was what I call distress tolerance. That basically means tolerating difficult feelings or emotions. So rather than having to cure them or having to quieten them or, fueling them by sort of, getting into an argument with them, you just kind of go, you're scared of rejection. You probably always will be, and that's okay. But, you're going to live through this. So that's really helped me to kind of recognize it, and then to say, but you can still choose what you do with this feeling, and it doesn't have to rule your behavior.
Yeah, I think you're right. At the end of the day, we talked about just in chatting and warming up beforehand that the monster is actually there as a benefit rather than something to be ashamed of. And shame is the killer at the end of the day, because it makes us, it creates the sniper in the shadows ready to blow our metaphorical brains out or someone else's brains out at the least expected moment. The whole point is emotions are there as signals, messages and clues, SMCs as I call them, to point us to trigger an idea that we need to think about this. And of course, you can either respond to the emotions, which are very, it's an amazing system, but they're very, very unsophisticated, and there's no nuance there. There's no intellect around there at all. It's literally a fight and fly system, the sympathetic nervous system. But we've got to start thinking, well, actually, thank you, rather than being ashamed of it, and using the executive brain, the neocortex, the rest and digest parasympathetic side to say, yeah, okay, well, that's great. There's definitely a message here. I was actually talking to, I've got a really good friend who's struggling with depression at the moment, and talking to him and asking the question, do you think depression's a good thing? Well, no, it's not. It's a terrible thing. It's like, but it's still a signal, message, a clue that something needs to be addressed. And the choice, of course, is to go down to the doctor and say, I need some Prozac and shut the systems down, or actually maybe I should find a tool, talk to somebody, develop this, develop that, whatever it is, to try and overcome it, whether it's meaning, whether it's exercise, whether it's eating better, drinking better, and things like that. And I think it comes to choice. But I think the whole point is not to be ashamed of these monsters. And I think there can't be a better place to find that, establish that, than when you're being shot at in Iraq. So give us a little bit of have you got a story that you can relate in that situation where you thought, okay, I could just say, sod it, I'm buggering off and fuck you and all the rest of it, and how you overcame it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember the very first time I got shot at in Iraq, and the classic thing is that you just can't quite believe it's happening. And it's, at night, you can't even tell by day because there's no tracer fire. So by day, you're blissfully unaware, but by night, you see the tracer fire. And it looks a lot like fireworks. So my first thought was, oh, it's fireworks. And then we realized it wasn't, and we were being shot at. And so, your training does kick in at that point, so I talk a lot about train hard, fight easy. So at that point, you're probably not necessarily thinking. You're just like, right, immediate actions are get to low level and punch out flares. But I think, and then there was a sort of slight feeling of exhilaration because like, wow, this is actually happening. And I'm going to brag all over Facebook about this, as it was back then. Not that we were allowed to, but, there's that sort of slight, sort of inappropriate feeling of feeling quite heroic. But then shortly after that, I remember this crushing realization. And it's sort of the moment you grow up when you realize not everyone loves us. Like not everybody wants us to be here. And again, it goes back to that goodies and baddies and being accepted and realizing that we think we're the good guys, right? But the people down there shooting at us definitely don't think that. Again, it's kind of sad in a way. You have to go to war to realize that life is not that black and white. But actually, we're not everyone's hero. And so how do you deal with that? It's a really uncomfortable realization. And of course, the temptation is to put a lot of bravado on it and say, well, they're terrorists and they're bad people. But and in fact, I remember as the missions upped in escalation, so I started doing special forces stuff, a few years later. And I remember we would go after, top terrorists, and then they would be detainees. So they'd get put in the back of our aircraft and taken back to camp. And, so I would be seeing these terrorists close up and, that they're apparently very bad people. But what I saw was men who looked very scared, and I remember feeling compassion for them and the other pilot saying, don't ever say that out loud again, Sarah. And I think they were worried that I was, showing weakness. And I think they were trying to be protective of me, actually, possibly because they thought if she says that as a woman, she'll be judged as she's not got what it takes. But actually, for what it's worth, I don't regret that I could feel compassion, because isn't that what it is? You've got to feel compassion for your enemy. And sometimes your enemy is you, right? In fact, most of the time, our worst enemy is ourselves. So I actually don't regret that I could feel some compassion. It doesn't mean I don't stand by my decision to join the Air Force and serve my country. But at the end of the day, we're all human. And, I think when you lose your ability to feel compassion for someone who's suffering, I think that's not a very good place to be, because it probably means you've had to shut down your emotions completely. And that's probably not going to help in the long run.
I think it's absolutely bang on. I mean, there can't be a better story in that situation. And I completely agree with that. It comes back to the whole feminine, masculine argument that I talk about, in contrast to the gender stereotyping, the labeling, black, white, rich, poor, different countries, women, men, etc. I think that's an easy way to block people out. And that's the whole thing about compassion. If we just become mean, excuse my language, mean motherfuckers, then everybody bloody suffers, including ourselves. And I think this is where it's really valuable, in that high intense life and death situation of being shot at. Again, typical masculine thing is to just be hugely belligerent and just attacking and being domineering and just having to win at all costs, of course. And then if we go back to the kind of suicide statistics, 76% of people that kill themselves in this country are men, for that obvious reasons, because there are times at 5 o'clock in the morning they can't do that. They can't be out with the lads and smacking each other on the shoulder and saying, come on, we're going to conquer this, that, and the other. It's a very lonely place. And if you can't have compassion for yourself at 5 o'clock in the morning, all sorts of terrible things happen, aside from trying to attack people, other people, we attack ourselves. And it's that real deep understanding of emotional intelligence. And I love the fact that you could keep strong enough, confident enough to say to that other pilot, actually, well, not say to him at the time, but saying, don't you ever say that. And you realizing, actually, this is part of your huge capacity to deal with a situation and understand. So, of course, if we don't have compassion for people, we miss 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80% of understanding, don't we? Because we don't understand how they're operating, and then we don't understand how we can influence them. We either put a bullet in the brain, or they put a bullet in our brain, metaphorically, in real life for you. If we actually understand where they're coming from, you can think, okay, I'm going to challenge myself now to see if I can encourage that person to put their gun down, and I can put my gun down, and we can make change. We can find redemption, or whatever we like to think of it in terms of biblical ideas. I'm very spiritual, so I just think this is it. I'm not naive to think that sometimes you can avoid all conflicts by walking across a battlefield and not expecting to be shot. I mean, it doesn't work that way. But I do think that we are massively labeling ourselves now and separating ourselves from each other, separating ourselves from the ability to be, for a masculine male like me, a typical kind of alpha male, sporty and all the rest of it, to be compassionate. I just see it causing so much destruction. And again, so it comes back to, go back to your military experience, is did you feel ashamed to be a woman, i.e. femininity? Did other men feel threatened by your femininity? Did you find actually that the kind of 5 o'clock in the morning moment when blokes are really struggling, they really appreciated your compassion and so were you, did you learn from each other's femininity and masculinity? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And again, I think it's the thing that I probably found most difficult was almost the other way around. Like, I was probably expected to be softer and more feminine, and I can be quite prickly. So, I'm sort of showing there that, I can have compassion for my enemy, but that doesn't tell the whole story. I can be pretty fiery. And I think most people who serve with me, if you were to ask them to describe me, they wouldn't say she was soft and gentle at all. They would say that I was pretty fiery. And I think I struggled with that because I thought, why can't I be? Because the men can be. So again, there's that kind of maybe misplaced sense of who are you supposed to be? But I think, and actually, a tribute as well, because we often think, well, women are this and men are that. But actually, I think the person who first taught me about vulnerability was my male boss. And he was the one that kind of, and this was groundbreaking at the time. But I'd actually made quite a bad mistake. I'd just crashed into a tree doing dust training in Kenya. And I mean, you can't really hide that, right? The blades were completely mangled, but there was that little bit of me that hoped that I might just get away with it because I was so worried about, what people were going to think of me. But also I thought, am I going to get in trouble? Because I've quite badly dinked a helicopter here. So I was pretty scared of what was going to happen. And you go through this ridiculous sort of charade of sort of seeing if you can kind of get away with it and doubling down. And I think, and again, you maybe see that as a masculine trait, this sort of doubling down and being belligerent, but I could be like that too. And it was my boss that went, you know what, Sarah, I owe you an apology because I put pressure on you to fly that mission. And so that must have made it really hard for you to acknowledge what had just happened. And I don't remember, that was the first time I remembered someone going first and offering an apology for something that clearly wasn't their fault. He's not the one that crashed the helicopter, right? But the fact that he was able to show that vulnerability in this sort of gung-ho, macho environment was like, it really stood out to me. And straight away, you kind of almost want to reward that because it's almost like, a cat sort of rolls over and shows its, fluffy belly. You kind of want to do the same thing and you want to reward that trust. So that allowed me to kind of go, do you know what? I totally messed up too. And it's so amazing how sort of contagious when people double down and show bravado, it's contagious. But as soon as you also back down a bit and go, do you know what? I'm a bit scared right now, or I got that wrong. People tend to reward that behavior and it can be quite contagious.
That is just so true. That's the whole point, isn't it? If we admit, if we're honest and fess up to the fact that we're a little bit scared, instead of it being you're complete from a male perspective or being socialized as a male for millions of years or whatever, it's like, I'll stop being a bloody wuss, man up and drink your beer, which I do refer to quite a bit. I used to fly with somebody who was a very insecure individual and thought a man thought that in order to be acceptable, you had to man up and drink your beer. And I just think he was a very lonely person, couldn't stop talking about himself to try and cover that up. But it's kind of interesting. So I think my next question is, do you think that boss of yours would have approached it the same way with a alpha male hero type? Or do you think the fact that, you're a woman and we see each other as slightly different, do you think he approached you in a different way, in a more compassionate way? Or do you think he would have done that? Was it groundbreaking enough to him to understand that we can do that with men and women, because we both have the feminine and the masculine sides?
Do you know, that's a fascinating point, and I've never considered it like that before. I think he's a pretty emotionally intelligent and astute bloke, and dare I say it, probably a parent. And I think when you become a parent, you're able to see, the emotions that drive the behavior more because children are worse at hiding them. And I think that's a great lesson in leadership straight away, because I kind of always come back to, if someone's behaving in a way that they're not proud of or you don't like, it's probably fear that's driving it on some level. But now you mention it, let's just say that it was because I was a woman that he, intuitively knew that he needed to be kind of softer with me. I don't know, but that's possible. And I think that's where there's a real opportunity, because we are different, and it is okay for men and women to be different, and it is okay to have feminine and masculine traits. But if that means that, certain things are more accessible with women, then that's an opportunity. And the example I have is the last 3 years in the Air Force, I taught air safety and human factors at the Defence Academy of the UK. And because I'd had my own kind of light bulb moment about well-being and mental health, and, like you mentioned, unfortunately, a few of my friends had been, experiencing depression and suicidal thoughts. And so that was very front of mind for me. And so I saw air safety and human factors as very much involved with well-being and mental health. And I wanted to really push the mental health side of things because I thought it was so important. So there was my own agenda there. But I remember I would run these courses every week, and it's there to talk about supervision and flying. We're not there to talk about mental health. This is not a spa. It's not a mindfulness retreat. It is air safety. And, on day one, you'd have all these kind of blokes with their arms folded, being quite defiant. And by day 2, you'd have people saying, look, I've had stage 3 burnout, or, my teenage daughter is self-harming. Actually, I was on depression drugs. And I wonder if they would have been so prepared to talk about it if it had been a man standing at the front. I don't know, but I suspect it might have made a difference. And so I think there is an opportunity. And if we are a little bit different around boys and girls, then let's use that to our advantage. Let's help each other out. And let's recognize when maybe a woman is actually a better person to get this conversation going, or maybe there's a time when it's got to be a man, or, you get where I'm going with this. I think we can be clever about how we use those traits and those genders.
Yeah, I think you're right. And really that's the seat of emotional intelligence, is being able to, you talk about it in your talks about being able to adapt to a situation. And because we still don't get encouraged to learn emotional intelligence as a youngster, because our generation is still not very good at it. So don't encourage our kids to do it. And it's not taught as a primary subject in schools and things like that. We're missing it. But the whole idea, so going back to that situation with your boss there, because the emotionally intelligent person would say, I don't care whether they've got, boobs or bums or willies or whatever it is. I just got this feeling, I've got this vibration in me that this person needs a kick up the arse, or this person needs an arm around the shoulder. And I think it's very easy, again, to put the labels of what we look like externally and what we've been socialized to be, instead of just thinking, okay, I'm going to close my eyes here now and just try and sense this person. It's a real spiritual idea. Horse whisperers, for example, animal lovers, they're just sensing things. And I think that's where we can get to that, because it's very easy to judge on what we see, what we've been socialized to do. But it's interesting. I would just wonder if I was in that situation of being your boss there, and I thought, would it be better to be softer? Would it be better to be harder? I mean, I'm a cricket coach, and I just wonder with some of the boys, some of them need that real, right, yeah, you're a son of a bitch and nobody likes you, and they get really fired up and they come in and they ping a ball down like you bloody wouldn't believe it, and they hit the ball for 6 every time. And others, you've got to just say, we all love you. You're the most beautiful, soft, loving individual, and I want to give you a hug, kind of thing. And that's what emotional intelligence is about, isn't it, really? And yeah, I mean, I'm sure you do that because you've got a lovely 9-year-old son, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And you learn so much from them. And I think also it's so interesting because there'll be times when your response isn't what they need, it's what you want, or it's what you need, because maybe by them being evasive, my boss could have got annoyed and gone, she's got no respect for me because she's trying to pull the wool over my eyes. So he could have responded to his need, but he responded to mine. And my need was to be able to, admit what I'd done wrong. So I think often our instinctive response is actually what we need. And equally, like you say, it can be very different. I mean, my partner and I were talking about this recently, and I said, what motivates you more, being told you can't do something or being told that you can? And he said, I like being told that I can. I like people to believe in me. And I said, well, that's interesting, because if someone said that I couldn't do that, like I'm, belligerent. So, my greatest motivators have been people that said, you'll never be able to do that. So I'm like, right, well, just you watch me. So it's interesting, the different motivators. And ultimately, you've got to work out, what everyone needs in that moment, don't you?
Very much so. Again, and just bring it back to the whole feminine, masculine quality, the whole extroversion, the goal-orientated assertiveness, which is, the belligerent side is sort of seen as a masculine thing. I'm probably going to get plenty of psychologists and sociologists disagreeing with me, but the studies and the books that I've read towards that, the compassionate side, that the politeness and the compassionate side tends to be more of a feminine quality. But also, interestingly, I was listening to some spiritual stuff recently. We forget that actually the feminine quality is very much about the fieriness, the creativity. So that kind of blends into it a little bit, really. And again, it's just working out the benefits of both of those sides. There's times to be, really punchy, sod you, and being belligerent, because it can be bloody brilliant, massively motivating. But there's also time, again, as we debrief, we get out of the aeroplane, you and I, both pilots, we'll get out of the aeroplane of life, the mission of life, and you've got to bloody well debrief. If you don't debrief, then you don't learn the lessons to move on. And very few people sit quietly and think, okay, I need to journal here, which is why journal's such a brilliant thing, isn't it? Either with a pen and paper or an iPad. I just do it probably illegally when I'm driving down the road. I just have my dictation thing on my Apple Notes. I just turn that on and I just absolutely puke into my phone with all my thoughts and do it on a monthly basis and try to review them each month. But this is the whole thing, is accepting that we've been a bit of a dickhead, a bit of a monster in our own mind, or someone else has been a bit of a monster, but really trying to think it through, really trying to debrief and think, well, what am I learning from that? And am I a monster? Is that person a monster? Is that terrorist a real monster, or is it because of their background that they've been shot at and they've been told that they're not worthy of anything unless they go out and kill? I mean, again, once you understand, we have so many more tools to actually address a situation, and it's not, not being a complete tree hugger and thinking we should all love each other, and we should be, but that's not bloody practical in life, isn't it? It's trying to find the tools to work it out. So I think my next question is, what was that marker? And it was probably build up that you decided that you weren't doing very well in your own mind with the mindfulness, and you needed to go down and work out how to best improve life, I suppose. Was there a particular event, or was it a series of events that led you up to that?
I think there was. I guess we're both old enough to work out that life doesn't always work out the way you want it to. And you don't have to have had something really awful happen to you. Some people might have been through some really big event, but most of us will go through trauma with a little t at some point. And we'll go through a series of them, whether that's a marriage breaking up or losing a loved one. And I won't go into specific details, but I definitely went through a trauma. And I'll put a little t on it, but it was big enough for me to be, I knew that I was going to be hurting for some time. And I was surprised at the response by the people around me, because there was a bit of me that thought, oh, I've been through a really bad time and now I'm going to get looked after. And a bit of me sort of was enjoying being a bit of a victim about it. And that's not what happened. A lot of, what I saw was people going, well, you'll be fine. But even worse, well, to be honest, we can kind of see why this happened to you, because you can be quite tricky. So that was quite shocking for me, that I thought, when I'm at my lowest ebb, where are these people that are, going to put their arm around me? And I kind of thought, how much of a monster do you have to be for people to not want to be around you when you are most in need of love and kindness, So I kind of had to look in the mirror a bit, and I thought, I don't really like who I am. And then, of course, the more you don't like who you are, the more you show up like that. So the more you kind of drive people away. So I sort of now refer to it as the pain paradox. The more pain you're in, the less likely you are, or the more pain you're in and the more you need love and kindness from people, the less likely you are to attract it, because you're probably showing up like a bit of a dick at that point. And that's what was happening with me. So I kind of realized I had to do a bit of inner work and work out why I was, why I had so much disdain for who I was. And interesting, you were talking about sort of depression earlier. I don't think that my character leads me towards depression. I think my character leads me towards anger and hatefulness towards myself and then also to the outside world. So quite a deep and probably not a very upbeat answer, but essentially I got to a point in my life where I thought, I just don't really like who I am. And I had to, find a way through that. And then, of course, you then start to see the markers in other people and go, when that person is showing up like a bit of a twat, I can see that they're desperate to be liked. They just haven't quite worked out how to deal with these emotions. And I felt compassion for other people who, I kind of guess were probably going through similar battles.
Yeah, I think that's the point. When we start to look outside of ourselves, we find the answers. I think it's very classic, isn't it? We look inside and and we internalize things massively because we haven't developed the emotional understanding, the social understanding. And once we start to look outside, instead of blaming everybody, because it's very easy, of course, is when we're feeling unsure about ourselves, insecure, vulnerable, is to blame somebody else. It's a classic teenagery thing. I've got teenager kids who, when it's not good for them, they're very snide. They're very, very tribal in a way. They turn on each other so easily. And I think if we haven't developed a better understanding through the teenage years of what's happening to them neurochemically as well as socially, then we take that into our adult life, and it becomes, as you say, self-loathing. You see it everywhere, whether it's overeating for an emotional distress, emotional trauma. It's overeating. Is it over drinking? Is it over, I don't know, socializing? Is it over Netflixing? Is it over porn or affairs with somebody else? Any number of these things which represent our distress, our internal distress. So, yeah, I mean, I suppose the two questions are, well, for me, I'm really interested by the fact that you say it's a little t or a big T, right? So in my mind, any trauma, any distress is no bigger or smaller. Nothing is worthy or less worthy. And we look at ourselves thinking, somebody else is paralyzed, so why am I suffering? It's not good enough. And someone else has lost this child or that mother or whatever, and my suffering isn't as good. So we self-loathe. The body has 5 senses, and 6th sense with your intuition, and it triggers. You hear a bang, a smell, or a taste, and it triggers something in for basic survival. And it tells your emotional side, you've got to stand up and you've got to take notice. But it doesn't know whether it's a big T or a little t. It's not sophisticated enough. You know what I mean? But I think we're socialized to be ashamed of the fact that we shouldn't be suffering. And then and shame turns into resentment, anger and resentment. And then it turns into massive need for retaliation and vitriolic behavior, either to ourselves or to somebody else. And I think if we can get to the stage of just thinking, actually, I may have just done a dodgy landing on a platform and it was a bit bumpy, and you hit a tree and all the blades are buggered up. It's the same internal feeling. It's the same emotional feeling. And this was leading on to my next thing about mistakes, is why do we see mistakes as existential, i.e., why do we think if we make a mistake, we're going to be rejected, we're going to be shamed? What is it about that? And I don't know, have you got an idea of why you thought you'd try and run away and pretend not to have made a mistake? Because I catch myself always trying to do that, trying to think to myself, convince someone else you haven't made a mistake.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And that just on that kind of little t, big T, because I think it's relevant to what I'm about to say. It's a really, really good point about sort of, there's a danger in kind of minimizing something or trying to compare it to something else. I suppose the reason that I'm reticent to use big T is because as soon as you use trauma with a big T, people go PTSD. And I'm quite wary of putting labels on things because then the label can become the thing. So it's not to sort of say that it wasn't a big deal for me, but it's more to be able to not let it take over my life. And it become, as soon as you say I've got imposter syndrome, which I'm sure we'll come on to, suddenly it becomes a thing that holds you back. Whereas if you can just say, sometimes I doubt myself when I worry, then I just feel like for me, that means I can deal with it better than just making it a big thing I've got to put a diagnosis on. But that's the sort of just my kind of own way of dealing with it. And I suppose in that respect, I think mistakes and setbacks can be little traumas, because, I think we're, again, quite hardwired to have a fear of failure. For me, I'm definitely much more scared of rejection than I am of failure. But I think probably my fear of failure comes from the fact that I'll be rejected if I fail. But I think, a lot of people are experience this, whatever you call it. And I think for me, it was because I didn't know whether or not, it probably did come to fear of rejection. Like, would I be supported if I screwed up spectacularly? Would people still back me and be in my corner? And would I be able to deal with the disappointment? Maybe you can, relate to this, because I'm sure, as pilots, we're always judging ourselves against each other, going, who's the best pilot? I mean, it's even in Top Gun, right? Who's the best pilot? And we all want to be the best pilot. And we're all sort of terrified that someone might be talking about us behind our back, going, she's not that good, and that used to be a big thing. I remember it. So yeah, I think it's a fairly hardwired thing. And certainly, there'll be a lot of bravado and a lot of competitiveness that we use to keep that fear at bay. And then when you make a mistake and you've sort of got no choice but to confront it and go, I'm not a superhuman. After all, I am fallible and I do make mistakes. And then I think underneath that, you've got this fear that, am I really good enough? Do I deserve to be here? So all of that stuff, I think, plays a part of our fear of failure, which means that we will often we'll go to great lengths to try and make it not a mistake and try and call it something else, or try and blame it on someone else so that we don't have to admit that we're fallible.
Yeah, exactly. Blame. The easy thing is to turn it outward and blame somebody else. But I'm just thinking about this idea about comparison, and as you say, it's in our world of pilots, and I think particularly you as a combat helicopter pilot is really, it's such a finite line. And is that motivating to be the best? Well, of course it is in a certain way, but it can also be massively toxic. You can start burning out from the inside. It's like taking a cup of poison or whatever from the inside. And I think working out whether we're being in a healthy way. Classic. I'm a sports person, so you play plenty of games. I'm playing cricket tomorrow I'm 52 with some of the guys I coach. They're 15 years old, and I know for a fact that I actually don't mind now whether I do really badly. What I want to do is try and create a good atmosphere in the team, but also have a laugh with the opposite side, because you can go into competition and look at someone and think you're a complete dickhead, and nobody wins at the end of the day. And it's all about triumphing over somebody else and making someone else small. But that's obviously a reflection of an uncertainty and insecurity in ourselves, rather than saying, actually, I want to test you. I want you to test me. So can you please give 110% of you so that I can give 120% of mine, and then I can push you to 130%, things like that. And I think that's the real mindset, rather than thinking, if I don't beat this person, then I'm a useless individual. And again, just thinking about it in the cave, right? I'm thinking, why was this need for comparison? In the old days, there were very few resources. So death was around the corner all the time. So if you didn't compare yourself to someone out at a higher level, then sorry, mate, we're being chased by a tribe. We can't keep you. So can't keep you in our tribe. You're just wasting the resources, kind of thing. And I wonder whether that's something we need to be thinking about again in terms of our basic operating system, our basic emotional system. But again, it comes from this sort of failure mindset, not to sort of dominate the conversation a little bit, but I didn't think I was remotely intelligent enough to become a pilot until I was 25, struggled in the classroom, couldn't concentrate, loved to play sports, thought I was just stupid. Classic IQ education. If you don't do top in maths and physics, etc., you're not going to be the future and the leaders, or into private school. I think that was again another message. I didn't feel as though I was comparing up to other people until I hit that low point, that perhaps a little trauma as a mid 25-year-old, kept talking myself out of interviews and etc. And it made me really reflect what I want to do. And actually, I knew it was about me and my failure mindset. And I thought, I'm going to bloody well do something about it. So that's where my journey of becoming a pilot, and I've done pretty well. And where I've got to the stage now of thinking, actually, I've still held myself back massively and still do. And that's why I've got into the mindset thing. So let's go back to that. I didn't feel I was remotely capable enough of becoming a pilot until I was 25. How did you have the confidence to enter that world in the military? Bloody difficult in the first place, as a woman in a man's world, and know that you could be shot at in Iraq and still survive. I mean, there's a real determination. What got you to that stage and kept you going through?
Yeah, determination or foolishness, maybe. I mean, I think, I was very young when I decided to join the Air Force. I was sort of 12, having watched Top Gun. I think what was really nice is that no one tried to talk me out of it. Someone said to me the other day, are we getting more sexist than we were 20 years ago? And I said, that's rubbish. How can that possibly be true? But in some ways, I kind of see where they were coming from, because honestly, I don't remember anyone saying, "Oh yeah, go be a pilot. That would be a great thing." And a woman trailblazing. People just went, "Yeah, go be a pilot. Fine." So no one, and I think when you're 12 or 13, you haven't learnt yet to have imposter syndrome. Maybe people do these days, but back then, it didn't occur to you to have that doubt. And my parents didn't put that idea in my mind, so I didn't doubt it, and I went off and joined the Air Force. And then, of course, you start to realize how difficult the training is. And when I went through the aptitude training, we went through as a syndicate of 24 girls, all applying to be pilots. Only one of us passed the aptitude. So I sort of managed to get through. And then the medical thing happened, and they had the whole thing about your arms not being long enough. Lots of girls get turned away because they're not tall enough, basically. So I had to sort of campaign to get remeasured. So then the penny's starting to drop that statistically, the odds are not in my favor. And I think that's when the doubt starts to creep in. But when I was very young, like you don't know what you don't know. It's that kind of unconscious incompetence, isn't it? You just think, yeah, great, I'll go do it. So I think by the time I started to encounter those setbacks, I was just so focused. But equally, I think the thing that probably did count, that probably did get in the way, is because I got selected as fast jet. I went through the Hawk and I did quite well. And I think I just got to this point where I thought, I still don't know how I've got this far. Like, why am I the only one that's made it? And again, we'd probably call that imposter syndrome these days. But I remember sort of going up for my final exam and I basically kind of self-sabotaged. That's not an excuse. It's also hard to do and you need a lot of talent to do it and a lot of hard work. But I think eventually it did get to me, but it took a long time for that doubt to get to me. And sort of feeding back into that question about sort of failure mindset, I think any time I wasn't perfect, or I didn't have a brilliant sortie, I thought, well, that's it. I can't do it. That's the evidence. And I think that's why it's so important that we reframe failure and go, okay, but I've learnt loads of things from that, or I was brave enough to try, or you know what, every time I go flying, I'm terrified I'm going to be a crap pilot, but that's a fear I can learn to live with, and that's the privilege. Pressure is a privilege and all that kind of stuff. So I think that failure mindset did become a problem for me, but it's not, not something that I experienced when I was 12, because we have this glorious ability to think really optimistically when we're that age.
Mm. And what was it that kept you going all that way? What was it that, I mean, I've got a word for it, of course, and it's an obvious word, but what was it that entered your mind to become a pilot?
God, I wonder what your word's going to be. I just thought it was really cool. I was just really inspired and thought that's the coolest thing. And I suppose that just that sense of what's possible, just exciting to think that, God, could I really do that? Could I be a pilot, And again, I do think a lot of it was wrapped up in wanting to be cool and wanting to be, accepted and wanting people to like me. I think there's probably a lot of that going on in my teenage brain. But ultimately, I just was really excited by this idea that I could do something that was just looked utterly epic from the outside. What was your word?
My word is imagination. So, because unless we have a big imagination, you're never going to find passion. You're never going to find excitement. And I think it's very, very easy to have imagination absolutely shot out of the sky. See what I did there? It's very easy. Einstein, I'm a big follower of Einstein, and he always talked about imagination. I've repeated it so many times. Imagination is everything. It's the preview to life's coming attractions. And you watched Top Gun, and I remember there's the story about you putting on the leather jacket and thinking that was really cool. Tell us about that. Didn't you ask your dad or something? Tell us that story again.
Yeah, I did. My dad, so my dad and my brother and my mother, they've all got a lot to answer for, because I watched this film and my dad had been in the Air Force, like before I was born. So, it's not like I was brought up with the Air Force, but it was obviously sort of in our blood. And my brother had just gone off to join the Navy. So Top Gun was a big favorite of the family. And I watched it, and my brother had this leather jacket, like in the style of Tom Cruise with the patches on it. So I nicked it one day, and put it on. We went for our family walk, and I said to my dad, "Do you think I look cool, Dad?" And he went, "I could just see you being a fighter pilot, Sarah." And it was that moment I went, that's it. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a fighter pilot. And then, like I say, like no one ever talked me out of it. They just encouraged me. I went, great, go be a pilot. So I went, fine, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And again, it just comes back to imagination. And, when we're younger, we want to be cool, don't we? Because that's our primary survival. We need to be cool. We need to be attractive. We need to have a persona that means we're not rejected, because again, the resources were so limited in the old days, and we needed to find a partner. We needed to have a troop, a tribe, a community to keep us alive. And so we don't have the sophistication of understanding mindset and emotions and spiritualism and all the stuff that we do now, because we're ripe in our lives, if you see what I mean. So you have to be motivated by something. And what is the motivation? And I think, the core of it is imagination. When we're young, you were 12, 13 at the time, but again, it's my usual story. 7 years old, summer holidays, wake up in the morning, have no responsibilities or whatever. What got you out of bed in the morning? Was it the beautiful blue sky and watching the butterflies? Was it that you wanted to fix the fence because you were pissed off at the fact that your dad or mum had bashed into the fence in their car? It sounds silly, isn't it? But we're all motivated by different things. But I think if we have an imagination, and when we're young, our brains are built for imagination. And I think when we get to that stage, you're in the fight, you're in the hawk, thinking about it for you, the hawk, and shit, maybe I shouldn't be here. How do I get here? It's almost that we've contaminated ourselves with the fact that other people have failed, and you see other people's trauma and fear, and you think, well, maybe I'm just like that. I'm not good enough. Whereas I think when we're younger, we don't have the capacity to ask ourselves whether we're good enough. So I often, in my sort of coaching ideas, is just go back and how did it feel? Close your eyes. Summer morning when you're 7 years old, how did it feel? And I love that idea that you're just walking down with that leather jacket on it. Massive excitement. I'm brimming in that story and just thinking, yeah, I've got really exciting. And it's so easy to strip that away. But if you do that, it strips away the imagination, doesn't it? And your great example is that you've come out of this incredible situation that everybody wants to know about, female pilot in a male world, Top Gun. But, Top Gun as a woman, it's really captivating, but you're very humble in the fact that actually you're just like everyone else. I like to be quite base sometimes. You shit and puke and bleed and hurt and all the rest of it, like everybody else. We're all bloody human beings, and we've all got these uncertainties and insecurity, and nobody's better or worse than anybody else. And if let's just bloody well open up the inside to ourselves and open up the inside to everybody else, we become massively inspirational. And we don't need to be cool so much. And let's promote a bit of coolness because it's quite fun and it's lighthearted and all the rest of it. But let's just open ourselves to the fact. So next question is, right, so when you failed your fast jet pilot and all that, is it a failure? Is it a failure at the end of the day? I mean, where are you now? What would you have been if you become a fast jet pilot? Does it matter? Was it failure in your eyes? Was it failure in other people's eyes?
Exactly. So, I went on to be a helicopter pilot, which was fantastic and really enjoyed it. And I think that's the other thing is often you could even, and mindfulness has helped me with this, would you even call it failure? Because you're saying it's a failure, or you're saying it's a mistake because you assume that it's a worse outcome than if you had a different outcome. But you have no idea if it's a worse outcome. Maybe if I'd gone on to be a fast jet pilot, I would have flown into a hill, or maybe I would have hated it. So can you really ever say with confidence that it's a failure? It might have been exactly, I don't necessarily believe in destiny and like it was supposed to happen, but it might have been the best outcome. So, I think that's the first thing is loosening our attachment to an idea of what failure really looks like, because it's just a path going in a direction that you didn't necessarily think it was going to go. And I know my first priority was, will my friends still think I'm cool? because, all the way through university, I'd sort of built my brand on like fighter pilot Fern. And, when I was flying the Hawk in particular, all my friends had gone off to London and they were sort of, wearing pinstripe suits and being very cool, having drinks in the city. And they would kind of wheel me in and go, this is our friend Fern. And there'd be some sort of arrogant broker going, and what have you been doing today? And I said, I've been flying at 7 miles a minute, And then I loved it, even though it was probably quite toxic. So I thought, am I still going to be exciting and exotic to these people if I'm not flying fighters anymore? So again, you're getting a real kind of idea of just how vain and how much I crave affection and validation. But I remember when I said to my friends, actually, I think I might end up flying helicopters. They were like, that's cool, And I was like, great. As long as they think it's cool, I'm fine with it. And then obviously went on to fly helicopters, which I absolutely loved. And possibly would have, actually enjoyed it more flying helicopters. And I also had this capacity back because I'd gone from going at 7 miles a minute to going at 2 miles a minute. So I was like, this is easy. So, I got to be top of my class, which wouldn't have happened if I'd stayed, flying fast jets. So back to the failure thing, again, probably at the root of it, the thing that most scared me was, will I be accepted? But also it taught me that, we might be quite quick to judge when it's a failure, and it might not be. It might just be another opportunity that, you didn't necessarily see opening up, but has now presented itself to you.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on. Is it like anything? They talk about the statistics at school. So kids, going back to the IQ thing, kids who are very good at IQ and do very well in the exams, plaster themselves through easily, struggle often in the big wide world because they haven't had a trauma of things not going to plan. This is the way I think about it. I'm just writing some notes down here thinking, what is trauma? Trauma is basically having to confront a situation that hasn't gone to plan. So again, is it a big trauma or a small trauma? Well, actually the body doesn't know. The point is, it's a message. Okay, this hasn't gone to plan. What are you going to do now? And instead of trying to hide in the shadows and effectively be a target for the sniper or snipering somebody else, we think, okay, let's see this. This is a great message. This hasn't gone to plan, so it's now time to be creative. And that's the difference between the failure mindset and the creative mindset, as I like to refer to, is that, okay, this is bloody uncomfortable, and I feel like a proper dickhead here because I'm going to be rejected and I'm not matching up to the image that I'm trying to represent, etc. And self-consciousness kicks in, of course, that whole self-orientation of being a youngster. Carl Jung talks about that in terms of, the first stage of man is all about the athlete. So look at me, aren't I great? And it can be represented as a kind of teenage idea, not that it is limited to that. But yeah, the whole idea is that actually, shit, this is really uncomfortable. Let's not try and hide away. Let's learn from this. And of course, you don't get to doing what you've done in the military like that, but we don't get to survive in life and really bloody well enjoy life unless we take all these metaphors that we're talking about in terms of aviation into real life now. And I think that's the beauty of where you are now, is that you don't talk about your military stuff unless asked a question. You haven't, tried to shove it down my throat or down the listener's throat at all. You're talking about you as an individual, as a person, and how you apply it to every stage of life, redefining mindset and redefining, the negatives that come out of failure, and how do we turn it into something more creative? It's creative imagination. I think those words are all lined up with each other.
Yeah, and I also think it's you can grow. I think it helps with performance and also resilience because, like you say, learning from setbacks, learning from mistakes, learning from failure, learning from the trauma with little t, they're all the same thing. It's how do you bounce back? And I think that is a really, really amazing skill. And, and I think it can help with resilience in terms of obviously how we bounce back. But also I think it can help in terms of performance, because you'll probably know as well, when you're going through a training sortie and a particular element of it doesn't go very well, the really good pilots are the ones that are, good at flying, but they're also the ones that are able to recover quickly from a setback and not let it ruin the rest of the mission. And that in itself was a real skill, being able to go, right, that didn't go brilliantly, but I can let that now ruin the rest of the day, or I can move on with it. So you learn that being a good pilot was as much about piloting, and it was as much about recovering from setbacks, and then turning it into learning. And that's a skill that, everybody needs this skill. And funnily enough, it's a skill that I've been talking to my son about, because he's learning touch typing, age 9, and he gets really frustrated if he makes a mistake. And then I sort of, my little lecture comes out and I go, do you know, and I tell him that what I've just told you about, actually the best pilots are not just the ones that are good at touch typing, they're the ones that can recover from making a mistake and move on. So you can't get this wrong, because if you get it wrong, you're learning resilience, and resilience is an amazing skill that's going to help you in life. So there is no bad way to touch type, in the same way that there's no bad way to practice mindfulness. You're either focusing or you're noticing your attention's, wandered off, in which case you're observing. So there's, I'm waffling now a little bit, but I think, there's definitely lots of opportunities to be quite optimistic about failure and what it can teach us about life.
Yeah, I think that I had a brilliant concept there. Yeah, I think it goes back to the idea that certainly for me, I've spent much of my life going back to the comparison thing, comparing myself to other people and thinking, yeah, but they're more intelligent and they're more capable, and I better work 4 times as hard as them to get to the same level. And that was all to do with my limiting beliefs that I'm not good enough for whatever reason. There's a whole load of ideas with everybody. Why is somebody, and I was just being bloody naive and a bit stupid, thinking that other people are better than me. And I'm really learning that about myself. And I think you talk about it in your talks and things, that this is not something that we're born with. Resilience isn't something we're born with. Intelligence isn't, in the whole grand scheme of intelligence. I'm not just talking about intellectual intelligence, which is IQ, but practical intelligence and moral intelligence and spatial intelligence and musical intelligence. All these sorts of things can be learned. Yeah, we may have, there may be a gene that helps us be more musical, because that helped us understand vibration in the forest when an animal was coming to kill us or whatever. We're basically designed to survive as a community or whatever. But I love your idea that actually I'm not a superwoman pilot who was given the blessing of being an amazing person in the air. I'm a person that's learned how to deal with it. And I think it does go back to that resilience thing, thinking, okay, I'm a normal person. None of us are perfect. If you become perfect, it's the most boring bloody thing in the world, isn't it? Anybody that's perfect, they're not, is bloody boring. But understanding that actually we can just take one extra step when we crash. We can just get up and take one extra step. We crash all the time as a kid, don't we, 2-year-old? We're always bloody crashing. You see other people, grown-ups walking around and life easy, and we're, sucking the dirt off the carpet the whole time. So it's like, well, let's give it a go. We're going to stand up. But you crash all the time, loads before you actually learn how to walk, don't you? So learning how to crash, there we are. That's another metaphor for
learning how to crash. I like it. That sounds like a book title.
Yeah. Actually, that's a good question. Are you going to write a book?
I've written 2. I've got one out called Fly Higher, which is all about mindfulness. I did know that. I had a bit of mind blank there. But it's yeah. No, that's okay. So that was about mindfulness, but it's illustrated with flying stories to make it a bit more entertaining, but also to sort of demonstrate that they work. So that book is out, and I've just finished writing book 2, and we've just been deciding on the cover work actually, but that's going to be out on the 13th of September, and that is called The Unitasking Revolution. So it's all about focusing on one thing at a time, as opposed to trying to focus on a million things and doing it badly. So I have, but I definitely will keep writing because I love writing.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and that's good, because we talked a bit about that before. The unitasking idea is that the whole, I don't know where it came from, is that women are much better at multitasking and men aren't. And actually, if you go into the psychology of it, as you've done much in greater detail than me, no, we just end up distracting. This is my problem. I just get distracted by things all the time, and I can't focus and I can't concentrate. And I realize, stop trying to do everything all together. Just bloody well concentrate on one thing. And you must have noticed that. But actually, in a helicopter or an aeroplane, you can't just concentrate on a speed dial, because you're not concentrating on your rate of climb and the mountains around and the other aeroplanes and helicopters around. So it is keeping that focus. I mean, how do you bring that whole unitasking idea in to focusing on the one thing, but then also being situationally aware, as we talk about in flying, which is a great metaphor for life? How would you do that? How would you focus on something, but not dismiss everything else that's going on around?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's understanding that we can't multitask in the sense of we can't focus on multiple things at one time. And that the term multitasking comes from when computers first started doing it. But what they're doing is they're task switching. So what we can do is task switch. And that's what you do when you're flying. That's why we have a work cycle. So rather than just going, I'm going to stare at everything at the same time, you go look out, attitude, instruments, or aviate, navigate, communicate. But you are task switching and you're doing it very methodically. So you could argue that task switching is just what multitasking is. But my argument is you've got to realize that you are switching. And when you task switch, you're loading the brain up with more things to do. The performance goes down. There's a finite amount of time for you to regain focus every time you task switch. So my question is, unless you're flying a jumbo jet, at 300, however speed you fly at, or unless you're flying at 140 miles an hour, do you need to task switch every 2 seconds? Or could you make that window of focus 10 minutes or 15 minutes, in which case you'll do it much better, finish that and then move on to the next thing. So I do talk about the work cycle, but sort of use that think of this as a sped up unitasking cycle that you could apply in your own workplace, but your windows of focus are longer than when you're flying a plane, because you don't have to switch focus that often if you're not flying a plane, I would suggest.
Yeah, I think that's great. The word that comes to my mind is prioritizing that situation, but not prioritizing what you've got to concentrate immediately, but without completely getting that tunnel vision, which we all do, don't we? When we're fight and fly, the body shuts down, the cortisol basically shuts down all the extremities. It doesn't need blood to our fingers and our face. That's why we go white in the face when we're fearful of something. It doesn't need our immune system. It shuts our immune system down. It doesn't need our digestion so much, and temperature regulation and sleep regulation. It's there just to keep us alive in that particular moment. And I think, if we bring that whole understanding of the nervous system into it and just think, actually, we're going to prioritize, but we don't want to shut down everything else around. And that is a skill that we can learn. Definitely we can learn, I think. And I'm always trying to think about that. How do I maintain my focus, which I struggle with, and concentration on one thing, but also keep those big things going on, because I'm actually better orientated, I don't know, naturally or whatever. I see a lot of what's going around. So I can, if I'm in a party or a group, I'm always thinking about what's going on, listening to what people are saying, the emotion in people's voices all around me, all that sort of stuff. Whether that's an intrinsic thing, I don't know. But then I find it difficult to concentrate on the conversation now. And I really try and train myself to say, don't miss out on this conversation here, because you're trying to pick up on that as well. And it's not being distracted. And I think that was part of what I would say my own personal ADHD. I have no idea whether I'd be described with it as it when I was a youngster. I couldn't concentrate in the classroom for that reason. Thought I was stupid. But then I realized actually I see a lot of things that are going around me, and that's got to be one of my skills, and try and hone it. But how do you in the unitasking, how do you build that skill? What tools do you use to keep your focus in one place?
I mean, and literally there's a whole book dedicated to it, because although the concept's quite simple, there's lots of challenges that we face, like distractions. So one thing is mindfulness. So when you practice meditation, you will notice that your mind wanders, and you'll know that your mind wanders all the time. And you learn to realize that that's not a design flaw. That's just how we are. But when your mind wanders, you can decide what to do. The moment you notice that, you can bring it back to what you want to focus on, which, when you meditate, is often the breath. So I use the same technique, and when you're flying, if your mind starts wandering to something which is unhelpful, we go, right, fly the aircraft, right, back to basics. So it's the same thing, use the same skill. If you're sitting down to do a task and you notice you become distracted, you use mindfulness to bring yourself back to the task that you want to do. So it's things like that, is, just learning to, you can train your brain and you can decide what to do when you become distracted. You don't have to stay distracted, as it were. So yeah, it's that kind of thing. I did have another idea in my head, but it's flown out of my head now. But it's a whole book that kind of takes people through. Oh, the other thing I was going to say was, like you say, being situationally aware. So being aware of what's going on, if you think about it, is the opposite of being focused. It's being, you can either notice what's going on or you can focus on one thing. And actually, like you say, being able to notice and being aware of what's going on is also a good thing. So being hyper-focused all the time isn't necessarily the panacea. It's not the answer. So I also kind of say there will be times when you want to be a bit more distracted. So let your brain do that. We almost need like a bit of a brain holiday, so that you can, essentially, this is about working with your brain. So if you've got a really, really important task and you want to achieve your best output in it, you're better off giving yourself 20 minutes of uninterrupted time to finish that task. But then when you've done that, you've loaded up your brain with quite a lot of things to do. It probably will want to go for a walk and take things in and be a bit more kind of, distracted. So it's about working with your brain, but also getting the most out of it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And again, that's the hyper idea of being hyper focused or hyper vigilant or whatever. It can absolutely be bloody exhausting. I know that playing the guitar, I do it too much sometimes, and then it just becomes worse and worse. I get worse. It's like, what the hell's wrong with you? And I just, even though I'm 52, I'm just like, Ben, for Christ's sake, just go out, have a cup of tea, just go for a walk around the corner. You'll come back. And I'm still struggling to convince myself to do that, because I think you're just not good enough. Other people are better than you, and you're not going to play well in front of those poor old dementia patients in the hospital, as I did yesterday. And again, so distractions, and of course, I think the biggest distraction in the world is our basic operating system, our emotional system. Of course, we're constantly distracted by our emotions of fear, doubt, uncertainty, excitement, passion. It doesn't matter what it is, whatever spectrum of it. And I think this is why we need to develop the emotional intelligence, which I think you're a massive leader in that. I think it's absolutely brilliant. So, okay, so I've got a couple of things to finish off. I've just started that with Richard, my guest from last week. Is that I've developed this new saying. Okay. I'm going to ask you what your smell is. All right. Okay. So that comes from the three letters in the middle, M.E.L, which you'll know about, minimum equipment list. Right, so you can't take off in an aircraft unless you have a minimum equipment list. Otherwise, it's bloody unsafe and it doesn't comply with the authorities. So for me, it started off with M.E.L, minimum equipment list, but actually went to M.E.L, which is music, exercise, laughter, and learning for me. And then my stepdad added the S at the front. Said, "Oh, that sounds like smell." I'm like, "What could that be?" I think I went, "Shit, I wonder what that could be." And it was like, shit, yeah, it's shit. Every time something's shit in life, it's a fertilizer, isn't it? We put poo all over our fields to grow carrots. It's shit, isn't it? So anyway, so what's your smell? What tools do you use when you're in the moment of uncertainty and etc.? So I talk about music, exercise, laughter, and learning, because that all brings into my internal stuff, but it's all very inclusive. Music is very inclusive with other people. Exercise is very inclusive. I play cricket still. And I laugh, usually you laugh with other people, don't you? And then you learn from the circumstance. So it brings in the internal, emotional, and the external social intelligence type thing. So what's your smell, your M.E.L?
What's my smell? So this is like my minimum equipment list in life. Okay. So definitely mindfulness. Practicing mindfulness really helps me to just have a better understanding and relationship with my emotions, which then spills out into how I interact with other people. So mindfulness is a core skill. Also exercise. And then I guess the third one, I would say that is kind of a value, the way that I try to live my life. And I've sort of got three the first rule of life is don't be a dick. So try really hard not to be a dick. The second rule of life is don't become the dick. So, it's like you think you're being a really enlightened, great person, and then someone's really antagonizing you. And it's so tempting just to sort of put them back down in their box. And then you realize in that moment you've become the dick, right? So first rule is don't be a dick. The second rule is don't become the dick just because someone else is being one. And then the third rule is if you forget or fail either rule 1 or 2, then just apologize and be able to admit when you've made a mistake. So I guess is that a smell? Is
absolutely
that
love that.
you?
That is just diamond. That is just peachy. Absolutely brilliant. Right. So don't be a dick. Don't be dick. Don't become the dick, which is great actually, because it's about what are you aiming for in the future? What hero are you aiming to be in the future? Which I think is really good. And apologize. And you're so right. Us blokes intrinsically struggle to apologize. I still do. I still feel my limbic system, emotional system saying, don't apologize, Ben, stand up for your rights. Don't be, anyway, absolutely brilliant, Sarah. Okay, so the next thing, of course, is where do we find you? Where does everybody find you on social media and etc.?
Yeah. Well, I've got a couple of websites, but probably the easiest one is sarahfurness.com, because as long as you can remember my name, you can find my website. And so that's my website. I do hang out on LinkedIn quite a lot because I am very cool. So I'm on LinkedIn, so Sarah Furness, and also I'm on Instagram, wellbeitcoach.com. And I do follow you, Ben, so I'm sure people can find me that way. And I do try to do a video every Wednesday of something that I hope will be useful to people, and then something positive and uplifting on a Friday. So I've kind of got a basic battle rhythm that I follow on social media. And of course, YouTube has sort of put some videos out on there. But yeah, those are the things. Of course, I have got a book, Fly Higher. You can find that on Amazon if you want to learn a bit more about mindfulness, and keep your eyes peeled for my second one, which will be out on Amazon on the 13th of September. It's called The Unitasking Revolution.
God, it's just so exciting. I have to say, Sarah, I think you're pretty bloody cool. Okay, so you are still the 13-year-old cool person in my mind, but it's brilliant because you're inspirational, and I think the whole point we inspire each other, don't we? We really inspire each other, and that's the most important thing. So thank you, and I know you have a massive responsibility to now fulfill of making breakfast for your 9-year-old boy, and I hope he's not bashing the doors down saying, "Mummy, where the hell are you?" So you got to go and give him some good food. It's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. You take care, and definitely talk to you soon.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.